everyone to the broadcast. My name is Regina Simmons, and this is Just Curious. And today we are having a very timely discussion on overcoming anxiety. This is a topic that I am personally acquainted with since a child. Shockingly, you may not believe this, but I actually didn't even realize that I suffered from anxiety until I was an adult. I didn't realize that I suffered with it for many years as a child. I'm thankful to have been able to overcome, but I know that there are a lot of people that are still challenged with anxiety, as well as many other different types of mental health. And so today I have a panel of doctors with me, and I'm going to go ahead and introduce them so that you can know who we have represented here on this, on our stage. So first of all, we have Dr. Nikisha Hammond. And Dr. Hammond, just a little bit about her. She may look familiar. She's actually the host of Mental Health Moments, which broadcasts live on the Black Women Empowered Network. That network has over 2 million followers, so she gets quite a bit of attention. She's also been on a host of other television shows. She's been featured on ABC, CBS, Fox, and a variety of magazines and radio shows around the country, around the US. So she's based out of the US. She has been the recipient of many awards and recognitions, including the President's Volunteer Service Award, the Distinguished Psychologist Award, the Outstanding Contribution to Psychology in the Public Interest, and that's just to name a few. To find out more about her, you can also check out her page, which is www.drnikishahammond.com. I'll spell that for you. That's DRNEKESHIAHAMMOND.com. Dr. Hammond is also the owner of Hammond Psychology and Associates, and she's based out of Florida. And she also spends a lot of time or focuses heavily on completing psychological evaluations with a specialty in ADHD and learning disabilities. And she has a couple of books that are published. So you can look her up on Amazon, pull up her name, and you'll see that, as well as, once again, you can check out her on her www.drnikishahammond.com. Dr. Hammond, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for joining. We also have Dr. Melissa Sanin, and she graduated from Florida Gulf Coast University, where she earned a bachelor's degree in psychology and a minor in sociology. She was also inducted into the school's Hall of Fame. Well done. She went on to receive her master's degree in clinical mental health counseling, and later went on to receive a second master's in higher education, along with the PhD at the Florida Atlantic University. She also recently did a TED Talk on how should you respond when you hear a peep. And I believe this was based on her dissertation, if I recall correctly, our discussion. But you can find that video on YouTube. Again, it's how should you respond when you hear a peep. You can also learn more about her on her website, which is www.melissasanin.com. Again, that's www.melissasanon.com. Got it? Welcome, Dr. Sanin, to the show.
Thank you, Regina, for having me. Welcome, everyone. I'm so honored to be here.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate you being on. And we have none other than Dr. Darian Ray. He is based out of Bermuda. He is a registered clinical psychologist. And by the way, like I said, he's based out of Bermuda. This is actually Mental Health Month in Bermuda. So we have extra reason to be celebrating, but to be broadcasting and to be highlighting such a very pertinent topic. Dr. Ray works with individuals as well as families of all ages. He works with children and adolescents who struggle with behavioral and/or emotional problems, as well as with families that are experiencing relational problems, helping them to establish positive, healthy environments. He treats adult patients who may be battling depression, anxiety, or even anger management. And Dr. Ray has extensive experience conducting psychological evaluations for a variety of presenting problems. He is the assessment director of the Reading Clinic and has administered learning disability evaluations for both children and adolescents. Welcome, Dr. Ray.
Thank you very much for having me, Ms. Simmons. It's great to be here.
Thanks again. We're so excited that you're on with us. And last but certainly not least, we have the Dr. Chantel Simmons. And Dr. Simmons has, she completed her undergraduate degree in biology at Queen's University in Kingston, Ontario. Her medical training was at McGill University Faculty of Medicine in Montreal, Quebec. And she is a diplomate of the American Board of Psychiatry and Neurology Incorporated. Having completed her general psychiatry residency training and addiction psychiatry fellowship at Emory University in Atlanta, Georgia. You have been around, you've been to Canada, you've been to the US, and of course, she is also based out of Bermuda. During her time at Emory, she served as a psychiatry chief resident at Grady Memorial Hospital and was awarded an American Psychiatric Association Fellowship in Public Psychiatry. Her professional society membership includes the American Psychiatric Association, American Society of Addiction Medicine, and the Bermuda Medical Doctors Association. In 2015, Dr. Simmons was elected as an international fellow at the American Psychiatric Association. Dr. Simmons has served as the Bermuda Hospital Board's Chief of Psychiatry from September 2011 to September 2021. And during which time she served on the Bermuda Hospital Board's Medical Staff Committee, Senior Leadership Team, and the Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute Strategy Team. Dr. Chantel, you have done a lot and the list goes on. So certainly just to name a few, we want to welcome you to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for the invitation. It's a real pleasure to be here.
Thank you. And once again, for those of you just now joining, I'm Regina Simmons, and you can find more about me on my website, which is www.justkyrrios.org. So justcurious.org. I'm also on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, as well as a lot of our other hosts are as well. So definitely feel free to look them up. Now, one of the reasons why I chose to have this discussion, not only is it in Bermuda anyway, Mental Health Month. Actually, when I decided to have this discussion, I didn't realize Mental Health Month was coming up, so it just happened to be right on time. But I had a birthday last month, and you know, when birthdays come around, you kind of reflect. This was a big birthday for me. I just turned 45, not afraid to share that. But in my reflection, and I had these thoughts kind of leading up to it, but in my reflection, I recently, when I say recently, I really mean like last month, recently realized that I suffered with anxiety as a child. Now, I knew as an adult that I had what I call test taker anxiety, you know, being in university, that experience with going into, I went to the University of Michigan, so going into a huge forum to take a test with like hundreds of people there, and you know, all of the different distractions of people who finish like seemingly in 5 minutes. It's like a 2-hour test, and you like feel like you're just getting started, and you know, having that experience of like everything that you studied just being wiped clean like a blank slate. So you know, I knew that I dealt with that and trying to recover from that, but also what I thought as a child was shyness. So I grew up saying that I was very shy. And even as an adult, I always said, oh, you know, I was just a really shy child. But having dug a little deeper, I also studied psychology at the University of Michigan. So I have a bachelor's in that. And that was as far as I went. My background really is in the financial business and banking. But anyway, having constantly said, oh, you know, as a child, I was really shy, and having dug into, you know, really what that meant, I actually recently learned that it wasn't shyness, it was anxiety. And I really only just considered the difference between the two. You know, all of the feelings of being present at a party or in a school or anything that was really public, and the feeling of wanting to participate, desperately wanting to be in the moment and to be a part of everything else, but that fear. and not being really able to step out and do it because you're so concerned and worried about what do people think? What if you mess up? What if you do this? What if you do that? Even still to this day, I still have certain challenges where, if I'm at a party or something, I don't go to a lot of parties, but maybe a wedding, if I want to go out and do the hustle, I can go out and get started. But the minute I feel this sort of spotlight on me, all of the rhythm drains from my body. And it's like, what just happened, And so it's been, a challenge for me. And so I'm bringing that up because a lot of times when we think about mental health, a lot of times we go to like really extreme places. And there are people who deal with mental health on a very extreme level. But I think I want to also bring light to the fact that it's not always extreme. Sometimes the things that we battle with on a day-to-day basis are signs of anxiety. We know that there's COVID that's going on right now. Some people have been in home. Now they're afraid to go back to work. They really can't explain why they don't want to go back out the house or why they don't want to be around other people. And you just think it's because of this virus. But sometimes there's more to it beneath the surface. And I certainly don't want people to start like self-diagnosing and start, creating things for themselves or issues. But I'm bringing this out because had I known as a child, I could have gotten the help a lot sooner, to help me work through these challenges. It's not, obviously I'm thankful that I've been able to sort of cope and function with those things at, beneath the surface. But I believe that there are a lot of people that are dealing with this that could use some help. So I have a few statistics, and then we're going to jump in and start opening it up to my panel of experts, because I'm certainly not the expert here. Anyway, so just some statistics to get us started. Anxiety, and this is from the Anxiety and Depression Association of America. So I know sources are really important for you guys. Anxiety disorders are the most common mental illness in the US, affecting 40 million adults in the United States aged 18 and older, or 18.1% of the population every year. 18% is significant. Okay, so this is not something that should be taken lightly. We need to give more attention to this, and we need to start trying to erase and remove the stigmas that are attached to it. Also, anxiety disorders are highly treatable, so that's the good news. Yet only 36.9% of those suffering receive treatment. So I would have fell into that other 70-something% who went untreated. People with anxiety disorders are 3 to 5 times more likely to go to the doctor and 6 times more likely to be hospitalized for psychiatric disorders than those who do not suffer from anxiety disorders. And finally, anxiety disorders develop from a complex set of risk factors, including genetics, brain chemistry, personality, as well as life events. So I want to open it up to my panel, and I want to start out by asking the questions. What are some of the misconceptions around mental health? So I'm going to look whoever wants to jump in first. Don't be shy.
Sure, I'll jump in if that's okay. First, happy belated birthday, 45 years young. Wonderful, wonderful. And also, Ms. Simmons, thanks for being a champion steward of mental health. I think bringing these kinds of things up about anxiety, about one's personal experiences about anxiety, is not easy. But it's very important for people to see that that these kinds of experiences, these are real experiences from a real person. It's not like when you see those commercials and you're like, yeah, this isn't how life actually is. This is a real example of how, anxiety can really play in on someone's life. And there are so many people that struggle with, we'll use your term, quote unquote, serious, struggle with the idea that mental health is only for quote unquote serious concerns, and that, it's not for individuals like me. I'm just soft, or I'm just weak, or I just can't do it. I just need to figure something out. And then what ends up happening is many of these individuals don't get treated. Many of them struggle with psychosomatic symptoms. They go to the doctor, they say, I have headaches, I feel nausea, all these kinds of things, but there doesn't seem to be any direct cause. And it really takes away from their day-to-day life and functioning, even if it's not a quote unquote serious mental health issue or concern. And I hope that one of the things that people see in terms of the misconceptions here is that I would say, and I'll speak for myself, not necessarily knowing other people's practices, most of the individuals that come into my office come in with no, quote unquote non-serious problems that are, that are serious for them because, it impacts them on a day-to-day basis, but not what society would deem serious because, their relationship issues, their social anxiety, and instead of, trying to keep it to themselves, they find the courage and strength to talk to somebody who's unbiased, who's supposed to be non-judgmental, who's supposed to create a safe environment for them and just hear them out, where sometimes it's difficult to do that in the family stead or amongst friends. And we kind of figure out what makes it work for them and how we can kind of get around this or work through it. So one of the things I would certainly say to the audience is that there's a huge misconception that if it's not super serious, then you shouldn't go see a mental health professional. And one of the things I would hope that you would get out of this today is that, people struggle with anxiety symptoms all the time and they try and work it out themselves. They may have some supports in place and that's great. And exercise and things like that really help. But when that doesn't seem to do enough, it's always okay to look into individuals that are willing to help, that have the professional expertise to kind of work through and just listen and allow the individual to be heard so that they can feel, honestly, many clients say they feel relieved that, that this isn't something that they should have to struggle alone with, that this is something that needs to be kind of addressed seriously, even if they don't necessarily see it as a serious mental health issue. So thank you very much again for bringing forth your experience, because I think that's one of the most powerful things people can do, especially in Mental Health Month, to bring this kind of darkness to light, so to speak, where we can kind of see that, mental health isn't something that just is belongs to inpatients in more serious conditions. It's an important factor of everybody's life.
It is. I think one of the goals of this discussion also is that people will begin to live their best lives and bring their full self to every moment and every event. And I'm just reflecting that there were so many moments that I missed out on because I was there, but I just wasn't fully there. I couldn't pull myself out of whatever that anxiety was so that I could be in that moment. So that's actually one of my goals. Who else wants to jump in?
Yeah, I wanted to say, I completely agree with what Dr. Ray was saying. And also thank you, Mrs. Simmons, for bringing to light all of the statistics. And the reason why that's important is because hundreds of people that I've met with any type of mental health issue always feel like they're alone in the depression or in the anxiety, or no one else has this experience, when the reality is there are millions of people around the globe that have that experience. And again, to what Dr. Ray was saying, and the same thing with my practice, it's not, well, especially usually in private practice, we're not seeing the 2% of the population that have the chronic, severe schizophrenia. I think most times when people think of mental health issues, it's like schizophrenia, hallucination, severe bipolar disorder. But there's this whole other side of the spectrum where many of us had a loss of a loved one, or we had a breakup of a relationship, or loss of a job, or stress from family or friends, those type of things that happen to every single one of us in life. And you react to that. And sometimes you're good, like you're at a good place where you can manage it. And other times it is a struggle. It is a mental health struggle to get through those times. So again, just for everyone to really understand, there's a huge spectrum of mental health. Every single person has mental health. You may not have a mental health disorder, but you have mental health. And again, to your point, about living your best life, there is no award that you get for suffering. So to learn these things, and I that's why I appreciate this forum, to understand what you're going through, like, hey, this may be an issue. I need to see a mental health professional, or whatever the next steps you need to take. It's really important so that you can have a better quality of life. So I just thank you also for this forum, because the earlier you know what you're dealing with, the earlier you can get some type of help. Again, it could be family or friends, or it could be a mental health professional, just depending on the issue. But it's really, really important to not leave this untreated.
Thank you, Dr. Hammond. And thanks again, Dr. Ray, as well as what you provided so far. Something that really jumped out at me, you mentioned the loss of a job. And we know that there are so many people that have lost jobs recently, and having switched jobs, on purpose a couple of years ago, after being at a company for 15 years, that did something to me mentally. I mean, that it was, it's almost like being in a relationship for 15 years, and then to leave, like, that is a mental challenge, sometimes. And I'm just kind of reflecting, I'm like, what, I remember going through that challenge of that separation from a job and the people that you work with for so long, and having to transition to something else. And sometimes people don't have anything else to transition into it. So we know right now with the COVID and pandemic environment that we're in, a lot of people are dealing with that. So sometimes people may not have even dealt with mental health before, and it may be something that may trigger it even as an adult. So this is another reason why we really need to be keen and just aware and be willing to talk to people. Like, it's okay. Maybe you didn't have the issue before, but maybe now this is something that's come up, and we should really seek that help. Thank you, Dr. Hammond. I'm going to open it up. Any of our other guests want to jump in on this question?
No, I was just reflecting on your comments around COVID-19. And my hope is that that's actually one of the silver linings of this pandemic, because I think there are very few of us who haven't gone through some degree of worry, anxiety, sadness, depression over the past year and a half, with the uncertainty that we've been dealing with, the unpredictability, the surges. So I've reflected upon it myself a number of times over the past 18 months, and I really do hope that this is one of the silver linings coming out of this pandemic, that we'll have an increased collective global awareness of the importance of recognizing difficult periods in one life and supporting our own mental wellness. So I'm so really grateful to you for hosting this forum, because I think it's really important that we have these open discussions, and to be able to normalize, when I say normalize, to recognize that it's okay to come in to ask for support. Unlike some of our other colleagues on the call, the bulk of my work is inpatient mental health, where individuals tend to be struggling with the most acute of symptoms at that time. But often what we recognize is that the symptoms that the individual might have been struggling with have been there for a period of time, and it's a bit of a buildup. And so if we have an opportunity to intervene early, I'm such an advocate for that. I think one of the take-home messages I'd like the audience to leave with is that it's not just about medications. There's so many options out there. I mean, I'm a psychiatrist, as you heard. I do spend a lot of time prescribing medications, but I also recognize the concerns associated with medications. Individuals may be worried about side effects, risk of becoming dependent in the long term. I think it's so important to just have that conversation, because A, there are options other than medications, but B, I think one of our goals is to put together a holistic plan that can meet the individual's needs. And so I just want to echo the other panelists' comments. If we can at least start the conversation, then it provides an opportunity for us to look at what may be the best fit for support for that particular individual.
That's excellent. Thank you, Dr. Chantel. I love that you brought up that point about the medicine. There are many different treatments. Medicine may be one, but there's also other things. And, having been someone that didn't receive this, probably the support that I should have gotten and should have reached out for had I known early on. But as a Christian, I found that with me, one of the things that's helped me overcome my anxiety is really my thinking. And I think that that's, a lot of it is also, not a lot of it, but some of it is our thought process. And it's even just getting somebody to help you talk things through to see, are you rationalizing things properly? Are you blowing things out of the proportion? And for me, I think a big part of my ability to have overcome it, or have gotten to the point where I can manage this a lot better, is that I had to change my thought process. I had to change the way, I thought. And so the Bible actually teaches, I learned from the Word of God that, I have to renew my mind on certain things. If I'm concerned about something, let's take something as silly or simple as, Bermuda has really large roaches, and being from Detroit, Michigan originally, I was not used to that. So coming to Bermuda and seeing these huge things and they fly at you, and, I used to be terrified, and it, God forbid, one landed on me, because I would literally like cry, or I would scream and holler, and I would just like, my husband would be like, what's going on? You know, like I would just sort of frighten everybody. But I've gotten myself to a mental point, because I've had to renew my mind and change my thinking about certain things. Like, what's the reality here? It's a bug. You can squash it. Like, really, do I need to panic and be this extreme? But for me, I'm thankful that I've been able to, you know, change my thinking about things and rationalize things differently, and get to a point where it's like, okay, I see you over there. You stay over there. I'm over here. We're good. You know, and it's not like this huge whatever. But the other part also with the medication is that I think that's also one of the reasons why people stigmatized it and kind of, you know, didn't want to be associated with any type of sort of mental health, particularly in the Black community. I know growing up, I didn't hear people talking about mental health. You know, I know people would have panic attacks, and I'm just going to be very real. I don't want to offend anybody, but growing up in the Black community, when you saw people having panic attacks, they weren't my color. You only kind of saw it on TV or in different scenarios, but they didn't look like me. It was, you know, a lot of times, you know, just because TV don't really represent Black people as much, you also often saw Caucasians on TV, sometimes women, you know, sometimes people had a bag, they were blowing into it, trying to catch their breath. And so because I never saw anybody in my community do that or talk about it, I didn't think that Black people actually suffered from anxiety, you know, so it was like, you know, honestly, just being very transparent, it wasn't until later as an adult when I had kids, and, you know, when I saw one of my kids sort of experiencing this, and, you know, he had a race, and after the race, you know, he was like huffing and puffing, like, no, you're just tired. And he was like, no, I can't breathe. And he was upset that he didn't do as well as he wanted to do. And he was kind of having, you know, a bit of anxiety at that point. But I at that point, I dismissed it, because I was like, no, you've been in that school, you're just picking up habits from other people. And I'm sorry to say this, but it's really true. And this is how I'm saying this because I think a lot of people sometimes have that thought where they dismiss it and they think people are just being dramatic. But no, people are actually going through an experience, and we need to be able to appreciate that. So I'm thankful that fast forward, it didn't take me too long to realize that, no, you know what, there's something to this. And I actually began to see, you know, little behaviors and little things. I was like, I recognize that expression. I recognize, you know, my child being on stage and looking like, you know, all other kids look like they're enjoying it, but, you know, it's like, oh my gosh, like this is really uncomfortable. Just that awkward feeling. I related to that, and I began to dig in and say, you know what, there's something here. Not that there was anything, you know, really extreme, but I needed to be attentive, and I needed to see how I could be a support. So I'm really wondering, what can parents do? What can family members do to try and be a support, or when they see things, how can they help out? Like, what can they do? I don't know if anybody has any thoughts on that.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ms. Simmons, for being so transparent and talking about these things, along with the previous question and what parents can do. In the Black community, in my community especially, I did not see coping skills, the best coping skills. So I think the start of mental health is having these conversations, as well as understanding the language. There's so much nuances in this language. What is anxiety? We don't have the common person probably don't have that definition relatively available to say that, oh, this is what anxiety is. And so oftentimes we don't have that language to be able to identify those symptoms, to be able to say we need help. And sometimes it comes with a normal, if we've seen all the time when we seen something happen in our community, we have food to celebrate, you know, things, or we have alcohol involved to you know, cope with things and different things like that. So even as a young child, not even understanding my anxiety, but that's when I started writing. That's when I started writing poetry. That's when I started doing short stories and all of that, because of my anxiety and because of my memories, and just be like, the subconscious is trying to do self-preservation. I don't remember exactly what caused those anxieties, but I do remember in middle school that was my first time picking up like a pen to do journaling. And so sometimes it's that not having that language or understanding of what is actually happening. And that's what keeps us from getting that help we need. And for parents and families and relatives, I know Dr. Ray talked about some of the physical symptoms of, not feeling well, like stomach issues, digestive issues, or headaches, or things like that. And that shows up in children as well. And so sometimes the children are saying, my stomach hurt. You take them to the doctor and the doctor can't, says there's nothing wrong. And that's anxiety. So we have to dig deeper as parents and relatives and, coaches and support systems within that child to help see what was different, what happened when they go into a certain place, what transpired, why have their behavior changed, and asking them those hard questions. What happened in school today? Are you still friends? If you know their friend's name, are you still friends with Kate? What happened with your teacher? Did your teacher say something? So we can dig a little bit deeper into why are they having now this switch in behaviors. If they love to play basketball, if they love to go on the playground, but every time we walk past the playground, they don't want to go anymore, or they are afraid, or they are crying every time you put them in the car and want to take them to a place that they would have before been comfortable with going. Those are the small symptoms and signs that we need to pay attention to. And sometimes we don't have, we're always on the go. So again, with Dr. Simmons talking about, the climax of the pandemic is hopefully, moving towards out of it. Hopefully we can slow down so we can pay attention to more of those small details so we can be able to help each other and assist each other when we're moving forward. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Dr. Sandin. That is so true, those triggers. I think if people understood triggers more, they would be able to cope better or, work themselves through it when they lack the support that they need in that moment. It is, and like you said, it starts really early on. So I can remember one of my kids when he was 2 years old, I have 3 boys, when he was 2, he literally, we would drive him to school. He would get to a certain point and he'd be like, my stomach hurt. I got a headache. Like the dog ate my homework, he would start coming up with these reasons as to why he didn't want to go to school. And I'm like, this is odd. And it turns out that he did not gel well with the teacher, and so I'm like, why would a 2-year-old come up with these things, But we started to kind of watch and we saw that there were things that triggered. That was also something that helped me as well, like starting to understand my triggers. Even now, I think about what triggers me, if I'm taking a test and everybody's starting to walk up or the teacher's calling time, those are triggers for me. Those are things that, like I said before, will cause my mind to go blank and everything that I studied, it'd be like a chalkboard, just wiping it clean, and so how do you pull yourself out of those things? Like, these are the things that getting the right help and seeking the right support will actually help you manage. Yeah. So thank you for that. Anybody else want to jump in on that?
Yeah, just kind of along those lines, I'm just thinking about what a lot of our panelists are saying. And for me, one of the most important things in my sessions is, and when I'm working with clients, is helping them build their self-awareness and understanding what's going on for them. I mean, imagine if you didn't understand the symptoms of a very bad cold. Imagine if you didn't understand what the flu was and you didn't understand what the symptoms were. And one day you woke up and you had a head cold and your nose was runny and you started coughing and all these things started happening, but you had no idea what this meant. Like, you had no idea, is it going to get worse? Are things going to, am I going to decompensate into, not being able to get out of bed? How bad is this going to be? But we very much know the symptoms of a cold. We very much understand the symptoms of cold. And even our young ones understand the symptoms of a cold. I remember when I was a kid, I used to, when I didn't feel like going to school sometimes, I would put my head against the heater and just go like this for as long as I could. And I'd go run to my mom and be like, hey, Mom, I've got a headache. And she'd feel my head and she'd say, you're going to school. And that's understanding the symptoms of a cold, right? That's me at a very young age understanding what a cold is and what it isn't. I knew that it wasn't going to be hugely detrimental. I knew it was going to get over in a couple of days if I took care of myself, even if I actually had a cold. But for some people who don't understand anxiety and don't know what it is, it's terrifying. They don't necessarily have the words to express themselves. They don't necessarily understand what's happening to them. All they know is they have very, very strong feelings around something. And they can't see around it. They can't get around. And what ends up happening is what I say is, a lot of times anxiety makes you forget about the moment and lose track of where you are right here and right now. It's I give the analogy of trying to land a plane, and you're the pilot of this plane trying to land it, but during the landing process, you're in your head thinking to yourself, I've forgotten something. I don't know what it is I've forgotten. I can't really put my mind on it, but I've forgotten something, and I'm worried that it's going to be, there's going to be a problem with this, and you're all in your head thinking about the past, going through all this kind of stuff, worrying about this and that and the other thing, and then you're thinking about what's going to happen if you don't figure out what you've forgotten, and now you're starting to think about the future and all the concerns of that, but you're not worried about landing the plane. You're not in the moment right here and right now, and you miss the moment, and then you miss another, and then you miss another, and we live our lives in these moment to moments. I know that if you don't think about a future, you won't have one. But if you don't think about right here and right now, this is where you have the most control over, and anxiety oftentimes robs us of that. And I think that if we understand what it does and how it affects us, if we understand where it comes from and how we get around it, I think, going back to, I'm going to date myself here a little bit. I remember G.I. Joe as a cartoon, and knowledge is half the battle. It's part of understanding. It's part of getting around or getting through anxiety is understanding it, understanding what it is and what it isn't. And I'm so glad, and that's one of the purposes of this panel today. So again, thank you. But for me, having an awareness of anxiety and having an understanding of it is going to be paramount, for sure.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that too, what Dr. Ray said and Dr. Sanin, because I think you both are saying what's so important for parents too. I know that was, one of your questions, like parents understanding some of the symptoms of anxiety, but also some of the red flags, if you will, because it looks different. Anxiety doesn't express itself the same way depending on the person. For some people, it's very physical. So it's the sweaty palms, it's a racing heart, it's a stomachache, headache, or whatnot. And some people, it's not really physical, it's just more mental. So you're worrying about things over and over and over again, thinking about something. You can't sleep, which is physical, but due to more of the thoughts and things like that. So it just expresses itself in different ways. And I know Dr. Santa put in the comments here about having a panic attack one time and going to the ER because of the feeling that you're dying. And I remember that too. Like I remember I was 15 when I had my first panic attack. I had no idea what it was. I did think I was going to die. No one ever used the term panic attack before. And come to find out later on, I actually had low blood sugar. So when my blood sugar dropped and I'm like, feeling dizzy, I went into a panic attack, right? But nobody had the language to be like, listen, like you're fine, you're going to be okay. And I was like, oh, I have a heart issue, or, all these things, not true. So it's just really important, again, to know it. And as parents too, if you're a parent, you don't have to know all the red flags and be able to diagnose. You don't have to be a mental health professional, but if you at least know some of the warning signs to be like, okay, I don't know fully what's going on, but I know it's enough where I need to take the step to go to my pediatrician or mental health professional or another professional that for sure can say, yes, this is anxiety or this is depression or not, or you're just dealing and coping with something. That part is really important. So a lot of what I do in my practice is psychological evaluations to answer those questions for parents, because I have a lot of parents that are like, this is going on. Is it ADHD? Is it depression? Is it anxiety? Like, why is my child struggling in school? Can't concentrate? And the answer is it could literally be like 25 different things, but through testing, just sort of looking at IQ tests and learning tests and social emotional functioning and things like that, I can say, okay, this is what's really causing this and this is what's going on. But it's just so important, again, to at least know some of the red flags to take the next step, because a lot of children do not have the language for anxiety and what it is.
Thank you for that, Dr. Herman. Dr. Chantel, it looks like you want to jump in. Go ahead.
I know, I was just going to echo the panel's comments, and in particular, the thought process around starting out with a pediatric assessment if there's a sense of potential concern. So recognize that something feels a little bit off. Perhaps this is outside of the typical pattern. As several of the panelists have pointed out, anxiety and depression symptoms can often manifest in very physical ways. And so when I see someone for the first time as a psychiatrist, the first thought process is ruling out anything medical. Now, I would say the majority of the time, there's nothing medical that we identify, but at least we've done our due diligence as a first step medically. So again, I'm not a child psychiatrist, but if I see an adult that's presenting with significant anxiety symptoms, for example, one of the things that we'll do is take a look at, is there, for example, difficulty with the thyroid that might be mimicking an anxiety disorder? If there is, then that's identified, and we can at least refer to whether that is a GP or an endocrinologist for treatment of that. But if there's no medical cause that's identified, then at least we know that we've ruled out kind of the major concerns, and then we can focus on addressing the anxiety from a mental health perspective. I will say I have so much respect for psychologists when it comes to anxiety management. And I'll often say to clients, look, as a psychiatrist, we prescribe medications that are often helpful in addressing the symptoms. But my strong recommendation when there's someone presenting with significant anxiety is to connect with a psychologist, because of that point that you made about being able to change the thought process and understanding what are the potential patterns of thinking that may have contributed. So I really I kind of conceptualize anxiety management as a really multidisciplinary, like a team approach, and being able to collaborate with colleagues like pediatricians and psychologists. It's really just such a privilege.
Yeah, I just wanted to add really quickly that you can love Jesus and have a therapist too. And so people think it is one or the other, and it's absolutely not. There is reasons we have resources on earth. So definitely, work with a team, as Dr. Hammond if you need to take the medicine, if you need to talk to the therapist, if you need to go to the preacher, please do all these things, because these are people who are trying to see you do better and help you do better. So don't neglect one for the other, because it all can work in simultaneously.
Thank you for saying that. Thank you for saying that. Is so true. Honestly, growing up in the church, love the churches that I've been a part of and attended, and it helped me immensely in my spiritual walk with God. But this is something that has definitely been neglected, or even I think the church often kind of viewed mental health as being things that, or any sort of mental challenge as being something that needed to be cast out, or, you need to be delivered from it. When really, we need somebody to talk to. We need somebody, we need proper help. We need proper treatment. And I'm not saying that anyone shunned me, in that way, because I didn't even know what I was dealing with. So I don't think people could offer me to help because they just agreed with me that I was shy. But, just seeing the body of Christ, the church of believers, the Christian church, has not really done much service in this area. And so that's something that, in my opinion, needs to change. But thank you so much. That is so true. I had another question I wanted to ask, and this is, in your experience, based on what you've seen, is mental health something that gets progressively worse if not dealt with, or, even if it's, anxiety or whatever the challenge is this something that you see that gets progressively worse if it's not dealt with, or do you just see people just kind of stay the same and just whatever?
I think
No, go ahead.
Okay.
Go ahead, Dr. Howard.
Okay. So it varies. What I've seen is sometimes it depends on a person's life circumstances. So sometimes if a person has anxiety, it's left untreated, even though it could stay relatively stable. When something happens, that's a roadblock, a bump in the road, again, loss of a loved one, or breakup of a relationship, financial issues, those types of things, then it could severely worsen, especially if left untreated. But it really varies per person, because again, when we say untreated, there are people that not every single person needs therapy, not every single person needs medication, right? But some people do. So it depends on a lot of different factors, like your support system. Sometimes the people around you are so amazing. I hope everybody has that, and that is enough. Sometimes the people around you are so amazing, but that's still not enough, right? And you still need the help of a mental health professional, which is totally fine. So it really just depends on what resources are in that person's life, and again, life circumstances, because there's things that are, I mean, I've heard so many stories, but they're really difficult things to deal with. So if you're already struggling with anxiety and something pops up in your life, especially unexpected, it could really lead to a downhill spiral if left untreated in most times.
It's funny, my thoughts were actually going to be relatively similar to Dr. Hammond's in that I agree. I think that there's a wide range of potential trajectories, but oftentimes it can be that one particular life stressor that is enough, that kind of that last straw, if you will. So I was thinking when you asked the question about kind of untreated symptoms and the potential impact of it, during my residency at Emory, I worked with I did individual therapy. It was part of our psychiatric training. And one of the clients that was referred to me was a Vietnam era veteran.
Looks like she froze a little bit. Okay. Dr. Darian, we'll let you go ahead and jump in.
Sure. She can jump back in if if we get her back. One of the things I was thinking about is I wouldn't say math was my strong suit, but I often think of two different factors in psychology that are well known as this concept of protective factors and risk factors. Where a protective factor is something that galvanizes the individual and helps them feel and supports them, or nourishes them, or empowers them. It can be a good relationship with their parents. It can be a good job. It can be financial support. It can be a lot of different things. It could be even just a good friend, or being good at sports. It could be you're really good at math, or something like that. All of these things could potentially be reasonable and meaningful protective factors for the individual. And there are also what are known as risk factors. And risk factors are sometimes seen as things like single parent homes or things like that, but there are other risk factors that are more benign and not necessarily seen as risk factors, like only having one or two friends in school, or struggling with not feeling like you're getting along in a culture that you're living in, or there are a lot of different things that may make a person feel isolated, or small, or disempowered, if you will. And these things, some of these things are we walk around with every day. And we don't necessarily notice them anymore because we become accustomed to them. And then, as I think it was Dr. Simmons who mentioned that they may be on the last draw when something like COVID comes along and just creates an additional layer of stress for us that we were managing before, because our equation of protective factors and risk factors were okay, but COVID's just kind of tilt the scale in the wrong side, and we've not been able to manage. So I think you're right. I think Dr. Hammond and Dr. Sandler also brought up important things. It's a complex question. And a lot of times it comes down to what kind of protective factors you have for yourself, what can you lean on, how often you can lean on, and how effective it is, as opposed to the risk factors, some of which you may have had for a very, very long time, and they don't necessarily see them as risk factors, but they still represent risk factors, because when the final straw hits, it's everything underneath it as well that's pushing it down. So, in looking at the overall picture, I would certainly say that we really have to see, really have to allow an individual to tell their story. And then a lot of times things come up in a therapy session that the individual doesn't even recognize is really holding them back or causing them harm. And we bring that to light, and we just ask questions, and obviously in a non-judgmental way, but it allows the person to say, yeah, actually this has kind of been tough for me, and I've never really thought of it that way. I've just kind of always dealt with it. And like you were saying, Ms. Simmons, about just kind of dealing with your anxiety and dealing with the fact that, I have to do a play. It's something everybody has to do. Everybody else seems to get along with it, but it may be extra challenging for you for reasons that you're not even thinking of or don't even recognize. So when we think about whether or not you have to enter therapy or not, it's everybody's allowed to have their own problems. Everybody's allowed to have the only weight that their problems have. It's not a competition. Just because you're sitting here thinking that you're financially stable through this crisis and you don't have a lot of issues that some other people you know are struggling with doesn't mean you don't deserve to go to see somebody when you're struggling with anxiety, and vice versa. Just so it's something that we really kind of help as therapists to bring to light in terms of an individual's holistic picture and finding ways to bring a sense of empowerment in using the protective factors and in ways that are more intentional. I work with a lot of teenagers who don't understand the value, well, who struggle with understanding the value sometimes of meeting their friends face to face. Teenagers are very good at understanding and using technology, and they're all about using FaceTime and things like that. And then it's really important for them to connect with their friends, so that's what they do. But many of them don't necessarily connect with their friends face to face because of how technology has been able to kind of help them stay connected with their friends. And since the pandemic has really hit, it's really, at least initially, we were seen as not to kind of stay isolated from people for our own protection. And when things kind of died down and we were able to kind of meet, at least within the realms of Bermuda, teenagers wouldn't necessarily take that as an opportunity because they got so used to being online with their friends that they didn't necessarily feel the need to connect with their friends, and they didn't recognize the value behind it. And so when talking about these kinds of things, this is just an example of how some things that you may have taken for granted before and didn't think was a big deal actually ends up being a very important protective factor and preventative factor in terms of things like anxiety or depression.
Something else I wanted to, and thank you for sharing that because it keeps triggering things. But I wanted to sort of shift gears a little bit and think about mental health and employment and things of that nature. So I'm thankful that nowadays a lot of companies will allow employees to take like a mental health day, whereas this is something that's pretty frequent, pretty recent. So before, if people felt like I just can't, get myself up to get out of the house to go into work today because of whatever they were dealing with, it's almost like people felt like they needed to lie and they say they're sick or whatever. But mental health is as equally important as physical health. And I guess you may say they're one and the same, to a certain extent, or there's a lot of overlap. But I remember an experience that I went through, some years ago when I was at a different employer and I had a bully manager, and the stress and honestly, I felt like the bullying became like, I felt like I was going through some post-traumatic stress syndrome because of what I was, dealing with this individual. And the amount of stress that I felt, I felt like it put me into like a whirlwind where, trying to manage this experience, trying to understand someone else who just really wasn't a logical person, but trying to understand them put me into this weird cycle of stress and anxiety. And that's when I also began to realize like something's wrong here. If I'm coming in and I'm sitting at my desk, and as soon as I sit at my desk, I'm opening my computer, and then I'm feeling this thing sort of rising up, like, what is this? And I recall the moment when I was like, I'm having this anxiety because I'm thinking that I'm going to get an email from this particular manager and that she's going to be complaining about something. And so we see, people dealing with stress, which can be a trigger in the workplace. And like I said, thankful now that they have mental health days. But I'm wondering, what are some, and I don't know if you guys ever give any thought to this, but what are some things that people can do to sort of help themselves manage in the workplace? Or what are some things that employers might be able to do to help a struggling employee? Because I have employees as well that I think that are coming to me to say, look, I'm dealing with anxiety. And I'm like, but they're getting the additional help, So what are some things that employers might be able to do, or employees, how should they, if you've ever thought about it, how should they connect with their managers, or what are some things that they might be able to say although they might be afraid to share it. But I don't know if you guys have any feedback or suggestions on that.
Yeah, right now I'm still working on that work-life integration. I don't say balance because you're not really balancing it, because some days are more than other. So you got to integrate it. So I'm still working on my work-life integration. And so for me, what is helpful, I started switching the language. Instead of saying, how are you? I asked, how is your heart? That gives into a little deeper conversation about how I'm actually doing or how I'm feeling. For me, with my supervisor, I will let her know that I'm tired, that I can't people today. I say, I can't people today. I need a second. And so we have those conversations often. She will ask me about my mental health. She will ask me how I'm feeling. So as an employee, as an employer, I think that's important to ask the employee of, how are you rating yourself today, 1 to 5, like being, your best is 5 and 1 is the worst. And then like, how can we get you to a 4, or how can we get you to a 3? Because you don't necessarily need to go from 1 to 5. You can go to 1 to 2 and be good. And so you can go to 2 to 4 and be good. So you need to like slowly, taking these steps. And so for me, I appreciate, those questions of actually like, how was your night? Or if they know when I was in my research, how's your dissertation going? The conversations like that was very helpful when it came to seeking out help for my mental health.
That's excellent. Yes, those check-ins. We see that happening a lot too in the workplace, where people are starting to check in to see how folks are feeling. What is your mental state? And, what are you experiencing and feeling today? That is just so important, because people have bad days, and sometimes folks want to write them off and sort of let that be the blanket description of what this, of how this person is. Maybe you just write them off as being cranky or irritable, when really it's something that they're dealing with. And it's so important that we take that time, like you said, to check in and find out what people are. That's good. I also know in Bermuda that there is the EAP, or Employee Assistant Program, and I would imagine they have something similar to that in the U.S. And so that's another resource and a tool that people can utilize. And I know in Bermuda, it's actually paid for by I guess it's included like in your benefits somehow, so it's paid for, so it doesn't even cost to go and have a conversation with someone. And I don't know if it's a limit to how many conversations you can have or how many times you can meet, but that's a good starting point. If you're someone to feel like you're having these sort of challenges and you're on the job, like, or you feel like you don't want to talk to somebody at work because you don't trust that your information is going to be kept confidential, then there are programs like that out there. Okay, it looks like Dr. Simmons is back on. So Dr. Simmons, I'm just going to see if you wanted to finish your thought. I know you have Wi-Fi went out there. Dr. Chantel, I'm sorry that you got cut off in the middle of your thought. Did you want to jump back in? It looks like she's still having some Wi-Fi challenges. I'm just curious, what led you to actually pursue this career?
Well, for me, I would say that I started my career, my bouncing to become a psychologist, I would say, because it wasn't something that was a direct route for sure, but I would say it was somewhat connected. I was a big history buff in high school. I really enjoyed learning about history, various types of history. And for me, it was kind of learning about the different important figures over time and what they were thinking and how they were thinking. I went into college not really knowing where I wanted to go. And by the second, I feel like that's a normal thing to feel in college, at least the first couple of years. And by the second year, I took a whole bunch of different classes. One of them was introductory psych in the first year, and I really kind of gravitated towards it. And by third year, I had known that I definitely wanted to do psychology, but the field that I was in, the university that I was in, was very much a research intensive field. It focused on developing psychologists as researchers, which I very much value because they guide the work of clinical practice. But I remember coming home and talking to a psychologist in Bermuda about what my options were, and I was very thankful to have that support. In him saying that, if you go research, then there's not a this is the way it will go, and if you go clinical, this is the way it will go. And I think it really helped me make my decision about what I wanted to do with my life and take more of the clinical path. But again, it kind of highlights this importance of knowledge. Like for me, having the knowledge of understanding what tracks were before me really helped me make that choice. And I think that today we're talking a lot about different things that people may not be aware of. And again, I would say that the biggest thing for me was my initial interest, but having the support and the mentor to kind of help me along my journey. And that's what led me to be a psychologist.
Thank you for that, Dr. Ray. And one of the reasons I'm asking this, I know it seemed like an interesting transition in the conversation, but I'm keeping my eyes on the time. I do want to allow some time for questions and answers after we have a 5-minute break and poll. But I just want to get this section in here because I do, I realize that this is a field that we need people to continue to, pursue. There are people who, it is a lot of schooling depending on what degree, what level you choose to go to. Obviously, you can go all the way up to a doctorate, PhD in it. And so, as I believe most of you have, but even if you don't have that PhD, there's still different things that you can do to work in that field. I mentioned before, I have a bachelor's degree, and I started out in doing as a mental health technician at the Brown Schools of Oklahoma in Oklahoma. Assisting young people who were I don't want to say locked up, but they were in this mental health institution because they had dealt with a lot of different things. A lot of them had been abused, or some of them had actually, assaulted other people. And so seeing so many young people dealing with it, I always had that interest. Of course, I started out in that field in college, but career-wise went somewhere else with it. But I just wanted to highlight that because we want to encourage other people. Like there are people that I would imagine will be watching. Not everybody is dealing with, a mental health struggle, but some of them just have an interest in this field. So I'm going to ask the same question to Dr. Hammond and Dr. Sanin as well.
Yeah, that's a great question. So originally, I think like many other psychologists, I really had a desire to help people. And in particular, my main specialty area is children and teens. But what I found at the beginning, I'm going into 13 years of private practice here soon in January. But what I found after a couple of years was I started to see like a bigger picture. And I felt, honestly, I'm just being honest, I felt a little bit inadequate only working in my office because I'm like, well, there's so many other people outside of my office that need help with mental health, especially with public education. And so that sort of led, that was not my plan in the beginning, but sort of led more into the media consultations that I've done for many years, and speaking to different groups throughout the country and doing Mental Health Moment as I have for the last couple of years, because it's just really, really important. The public education is very important. Doing these forums, again, I think we've thanked you 25 times. We'll thank you a 26th time is so important because, again, like Dr. Ray was saying, if you don't know, you know what a cold is, but if you don't know what anxiety is, you don't know what depression is, you don't know what you're going through, then you can't help yourself or your child or other people in your life. So that for me was a very pivotal point, and I'm honored and humbled to be able to reach an international community with the spread of information about mental health, what it is, what it isn't, mental health treatment. But I say for anyone, you don't necessarily have to get a doctorate degree unless you really want to, but you can be a mental health advocate and share your story. Only you have your story of whatever it is, whether it's anxiety, depression, or whatnot. On social media, we all have, most of us have cell phones or a computer, right? So being that mental health advocate in the way that you would like to, I mean, that's always an option. And I'm always encouraging people to share reputable information online because, again, this information and knowledge what is going to really move us forward in the mental health field. So I am, like I said, 13 years later, that's not what I thought I was going to be doing 13 years ago, but I'm honored to do it. And I still love mental health. This is my lifelong mission to really help people, but that's what it started as, my reason for going into this field.
That's awesome. I love that you pointed out, being a support or an advocate for other people. It's not always just about you, or it's not even about being in the career or in the field, but I think we all have a part to play. We can all help and make a contribution, in this area. So thank you for that. Dr. Sanin, I see you're unmuted. Go ahead.
Yeah, so thank you, Dr. Hammond, because I am a mental health advocate. I have a master's degree in clinical mental health counseling, but upon my graduation, I was asked, what do you want to do? Do you want to teach, getting your PhD? Do you want to teach mental health, or do you want to do higher education, which was the field that I was already associated with? I was already working on campus, research assistant, graduate assistant, working with multicultural students. So I was like, no, I want to go and help my students. So I'm using the techniques, the skills, the education that I've learned, and with my students right now as a diversity, equity, and inclusion practitioner. And so I'm not a mental health counselor, and I don't do any counseling, but I help my students get the help that they need. I talked with, my research focus is Black men and mental health, and specifically in college students. So I've done talks. I'm doing these talks with you all. I'm doing different things on my social media promoting mental health because I'm passionate about it. So I don't necessarily see clients every day, but I am spreading the word. I am talking with my students. I'm learning what best practices for them to get them the support that they need. So I'm doing that advocacy behind the scenes.
That's awesome. And we just appreciate the work that you guys are all doing. I mean, it's just so relevant and needed even more now than ever. So thank you. We are going to go ahead and I'm going to open it up one more time and just check in to see if Dr. Chantel is there. But if not, then we'll take a quick 5-minute break. And when we come back, we're actually going to open it up to our questions and answers. So those of you who are on the call who have questions that you would like to ask our panelists, this is going to be your opportunity. It would be great if you want to go ahead and pop some into the chat just so that we can see what some of the questions are. And then I can, just sort of better facilitate that. Also, we have a poll that we would like to take of our audience just to see what sort of challenges you may have had with mental health. So first, check in. Dr. Chantel, are you there?
I'm back, and thank you for that. I'm actually smiling because the irony is I came into the office because I thought this network would be more stable than trying to join in from home, but apparently that's not the case. So I am on my cell phone, and I think I'll read the rest of the talk. It looks like that network is down, but hopefully I'll be able to communicate. So, thank you.
No worries. I'm glad you were able to get back on, and I completely understand that. So don't even worry about it. Okay, so what we'll do is go ahead and take that break now. My husband is going to pop up the poll. So for the viewers, you can go ahead and take that poll. And then for my panelists, you can go ahead and if you want to go on mute, turn your video off, 5 minutes. We'll be back at 2:15 your time, 3:15 if you're in Bermuda. So starting now. Go ahead, thanks. Great. Welcome back, everybody. We did get that, the poll ran. Are we able to see the results? Can we get the results up on the screen? All right, so I hope you guys can see the results. So based on the results, the first question was, have you felt nervous, anxious, or on edge in the past 2 weeks? We had 27% said not at all, 45% said several days, 9% said more than half days, and 18% said almost every day. And you know what the interesting thing is, that 18% is, it's interesting that 18% reminds me of the quote of the statistic that I read earlier about the amount of people in the US that deal with anxiety. Second question was, have you been unable to stop or control worrying? 54% said not at all. 36% said several days. 9% said more than half the days. And then no one dealt with it almost every day. So that's good. Let me reread the question before in case I didn't read it properly. It was, have you been unable to stop or control worrying? Sorry. Do you find yourself worrying too much about different things? 36% said not at all. 27% said several days. 18% said more than half of the days. And 18% said almost every day. Next question was, do you find yourself being so restless that it's hard to sit still? 45% said not at all. 36% said several days. 9% said more than half the day, and 9% said almost every day. And do you have trouble relaxing? 27% said not at all. 45% said several days. 9% said more than half the days. And 18% said almost every day they have trouble relaxing. Okay, do you become easily annoyed or irritated? 45% said not at all. 36% several days. 9% more than half days, and 9% almost every day. Okay, do you find yourself feeling afraid as if something awful might happen? 27% said not at all. 54% said several days. 9% said more than half the days, and 9% said almost every day. Okay, that was our last question. Wow, so we have, I think the poll is, obviously it's a small batch of us, but it's interesting that there's a spectrum of people watching and online with us right now that experience different levels of mental health challenges. So I think what that tells me is that this is definitely the time to have this discussion, and it definitely needs to continue to happen on a more frequent basis. So we are now at our question and answer phase. So if you have a question, you can put your hand up. There was some questions in the chat, so I am going to answer the questions in the chat first. And then we'll look for those hands so that if anyone else has questions, they can also ask. So our first question came from Shantae, and she wanted to know, can anxiety reveal itself through anger or frustration? So this is to our panel. Who wants to answer that? Anyone can?
I would definitely say that anxiety and honestly a lot of other mental health illnesses or challenges have the same kind of MO where it's sometimes it's like an onion where you really have to kind of peel back the layers. Sometimes people come into my office complaining of one thing or having a struggle with one thing, perhaps they're frustrated around it, perhaps they're sad about it. And as we kind of peel back the layers, we recognize that there are other feelings underneath that. A lot of times, there's been some research on how that plays out, the difference between genders, where for men, a lot of times anger is a very normal kind of emotion to have, as opposed to normal, I say in quotations, as opposed to because it's a lot of times socially more acceptable than anxiousness or sadness. And that's not just for men. That's sometimes a cultural thing as well, where sometimes when you're angry about something, it's really just kind of an outer layer that can impact that when we peel it back, we actually recognize that there's sometimes sadness, sometimes shame, sometimes anxiety, sometimes other thoughts and feelings that that are underneath that kind of need to be explored as well. And I look at it kind of like when you're at a building and your showroom is on the bottom floor, and there's all these offices above you, and there's a leak in your ceiling, in the top roof, that's just kind of making its way all the way down to the showroom. And the showroom is what you see in terms of the drips coming down into the cafeteria or whatever you've got in the showroom on the bottom floor, but the actual cause of the leak is all the way at the top. at the top floor on the roof. And you really kind of have to trace it back there. Sometimes we end up working on the surface level and we kind of make everything seem fine from what people can see and what you may be able to consciously tell. But there's a lot of times when there's more to it than that. And the question being asked about this, can anxiety be masked by anger, or honestly by sadness, or by sadness? Yeah, absolutely. I would also say that sometimes they can work off of each other, where the sadness, and psychologists know that one of the most comorbid diagnoses is anxiety and depression. When you have a case of anxiety, sometimes when it's more chronic, you can kind of get this sense of hopelessness, and that leads to depression. And the person coming into our office depressed as opposed to anxious, and we kind of have to peel back those layers. So yes, absolutely, emotions are complex things, and everybody kind of experiences them a little bit differently. And for sure, anger or many other emotions can mask an underlying anxiety issue, which is why sometimes it's nice to talk to a professional to peel back the layers.
Thank you for that. That is so true. I'm gonna just see if any of our other panelists wanted to get in on that. Okay, we do have another question, and this question is actually, I had another question, but I'm gonna ask this other one that came a little bit later because it's relevant to some of the things that you just mentioned. And what they asked was, can anxiety be a response to trauma? So we know that there is, what is it, PTSD? So maybe if somebody wanna just explain what that is and also answer this question at the same time, that might be useful.
It's funny, that was actually the case that I was describing before I lost the connection there. And the point that I was making was that the individual had gone through quite a horrific event, so he served for a year on the fields in Vietnam. But when he came back to us, he was able to compartmentalize it. And he went about his daily life, seemingly on the surface, to Dr. Ray's analogy, seemed to be doing okay. And he himself put that in quotation marks, but recognized that he was never able to really process it and deal with it. And so it wasn't until some 30 years later that he had a job loss that he ended up coming into therapy for the first time in his life after such a horrific event. So absolutely, there's the entity as you described, as post-traumatic stress disorder. And I think what was just really impactful for me about that case was that it took that length of time for him to come into treatment and work through it. On the surface, he said he did okay, but interestingly, anger was the primary manifestation for him. This was a relatively high-flying gentleman who did not find himself able to express the words anxiety or abuse or trauma, but his anger was very visible to those around him, and so that was really the focus of our therapy.
Well, thank you for that, Dr. Chantel. Okay. We're going to ask our next question, and this is, if you suspect someone is suffering, how do you encourage them to get help without coming across as being insulting or demeaning? So if you suspect somebody has a challenge and they need help, how do you reach out? I'm not sure if you guys have any suggestions on that one.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the answer is, it depends. Your response to them would depend on how close you are to them. So for example, if it's a coworker that you don't really talk to that much, your conversation's obviously going to look different than if this is your best friend. But I would really say to try your best, again, depending on how well you know this person, to meet them where they're at. It has such healing properties for you to say to someone, I'm here for you. I'm here to support you. How can I support you? Because people accept support in different ways. For you to even say, like, you could say you came to this session right here, right? And you heard some things today, and I know some resources if you need them. Even planting the seeds are important, because a lot of people don't reach out right away. But if they know you planted the seeds, you're there for them. If they're like, oh, I would never do that, I don't believe in therapy, or I don't believe in medication, or whatever they say, you're still planting the seed, because they may change their mind later when they're ready. or again, like we mentioned earlier, there's a huge spectrum of treatment for anxiety or for mental health. So it really has healing properties, as I mentioned, just for you to even be like, I am here for you. There are people, many people actually, that I have met who, I always get chills when I tell this, but who are on the verge of taking their life. And call it what it is, but someone called them, text them, or somehow reached out to them in that moment, literally, and told them, hey, I'm thinking about you, or how are you doing? And they're like, oh, wait, somebody does care about me. And it literally saved their life. Like, this is not something I read in a book. These are people that I have met. And it gives me chills to say that, because it's very powerful. I'm not saying it always happens like that, but it can be very powerful for you to say to someone, I am here for you. I'm checking in on you. I know these resources, and to share that with them. And again, maybe hopefully they will get the help immediately, but sometimes you are just planting seeds. But the most important thing you can do is be supportive for them, be a source of support for them.
Wow, that is so powerful. Go ahead, Dr. Sanin.
Yeah, also, I think Dr. Hammond hit it on the hammer on the nail when she talked about the relationship, right? And so if you notice something different, that's how you start the conversation. Man, I noticed you were, weekly posts, you used to vlog, and now you stop doing that. Is everything okay? Even those simple conversations will bring them into realization of, oh, okay, maybe somebody is recognizing. So I just wanted to add that to piggyback off what Dr. Hammond was saying.
Dr. Sanin, I'm reminded of your talk that you did on how to make a PEEP, and maybe someone might, and we're going to go back to the question because I want to make sure that Dr. Simmons and Dr. Ray have an opportunity to answer if they like. But I was just reminded of, like I said, the talk that you did on how do you make a PEEP. And that's from the perspective, I guess, of someone who is actually needing the help.
Yeah.
Can you maybe just give us a couple of points on how someone makes a PEEP and explain what that is?
Yeah, so the PEEP method, it's an acronym I created. So during my research, one of my participants in the study said, if you can't make a sound, make a PEEP. And this was a response to a question of how do you help another Black male college student who's dealing with suicide ideation? And that quote was so significant. And when I was invited to do a TED Talk, I was thinking about how can I make this practical and applicable to a wider audience, not somebody who's in the research, not somebody who's in the mental health field. How can I make it plain? And so I came up with the acronym PEEP, pause and listen to that individual who says, hey, I'm not feeling well. Listen to what they have to say, let them tell their story and their experiences. And then the first E is to elevate their feelings, right? Let them know that this is okay. Like, you are not alone. I hear you. Your feelings are valid. So elevate those feelings. And the second E is to encourage them to seek help. So we're talking about, okay, I hear that you're having so much struggle and I really want to help you. Let's look at what resources are available. Or I know on campus there's a counseling center, or I remember my aunt talked about this person. So having those, or helping them find the resources, because not everyone is going to know exactly what resources there are, but you have a better understanding of like Googling or seeing what's in your network, or seeing, piggybacking off of other people. So pause and listen, elevate their voice, encourage to get help. And then the last P is to be present. So being present is that follow-up, oh, last week or 3 weeks ago, we talked about you, not really feeling yourself, you feeling a little anxious or and not wanting to get out of bed. Have you talked to anybody about that? I'm here for you. What do you need from me? As Dr. Hammond said, what supports can I give you? How can I support you? So being that present in that life of that individual is very impactful for them to know, wow, I'm not alone and someone is listening to me. So these conversations happen organically or inorganically. It depends on the relationship that you have with the individual.
Wow, that's so powerful. Go ahead, Dr. Chantel, you wanted to get in there?
No, first of all, that really resonates. And so thank you for sharing that. Very, very helpful as you share. I just wanted to comment that I think it's important to reflect that there's a wide range of support options available. And I think certainly for those of us in Bermuda, mental health or seeking assistance for mental health disorder has often been associated with coming to Mid-Atlantic Wellness Institute or St. Brendan's, as was called in the past. And we recognize the stigma that we associated with the building itself. The reality is, at the same way we talk about there's a spectrum of mental health difficulties that one may go through, there is a wide range of resources available in the community. And that's a conversation that I try to have as regularly as possible if someone is contemplating potentially reaching out. I'll be the first to say, hey, I may happen to work in this building, Mid-Atlantic Wellness. However, if you are not comfortable reaching out through this option, then here are the other resource options. There's GPs, general practitioners, there's resources like employee assistance program, and there's a number of standing clinicians in the community, similar to Dr. Ray. So I think it's important to, the same way in the earlier part of the discussion, you pointed out that oftentimes when people think about mental illness, the severe mental illness tends to first spring to mind. Just recognizing that the same way that there's a spectrum of difficulties with mental illness, there's also a wide array of support options available in the community. And I think we're doing a better job as a community of increasing access to those resources.
Thank you for that, Dr. Simmons. And also, I just wanted to note for those who are on the chat that there is in the chat some resources. So there is number one, the TED Talk that Dr. Sanin did. There's a link to that there, as well as Dr. Nikisha Hammond put up helpguide.org, as well as another one with the cdc.gov. So that one has a longer link to it. And for those that might watch by replay, what we'll do is just make it available in the description on the video so that people can see those resources. Okay. Any more responses to that question before I move on to the next one? Just want to check in with Dr. Ray. Are you good?
Well, just a quick note. I think that what all the panelists said there were amazing. I think that it's important to plant the seed. I like how Dr. Hammond said that in regards to understanding that you may not be the final person that kind of gets them to kind of think about what they need to do, but sometimes they're just not in a space to hear you out. But connecting the dots is sometimes easier when there's more dots to connect. And so I would encourage that. And another thought that just kind of occurred as they were having that discussion is, for me, the best kind of intervention is prevention. And along the lines of an earlier question about what can organizations do to kind of help support mental health and things like that, is to provide beforehand a set of resources available to people that they can reach out to and that are local and that are available. Sometimes when you're in this space of needing mental health, you don't necessarily have the capacity to go out and search for it, or you don't necessarily know how to search for it. And so it's good to have that resource available to you and accessible to you. It's kind of like, it's a fire drill that you do and you practice before you have the actual fire, so that when things go and become too emotionally difficult to manage, that you have the resources in front of you. You have the meeting with your workers, your employees, and you say, look, mental health is very important to us. We have EAP available. This is how you get in touch with them. We have a contact person who's involved in mental health. This is what you can do to talk to them. We have these resources available in the community. This is where you can find them, and have that list available to them and remind them of that periodically, just like you would a fire drill, because people forget how to do the fire drill over time if you leave it to the last moment. So yeah, that's just, those are some thoughts that came to mind as they were talking, but I think that they summarized that excellently.
Thank you for that. I love the prevention and the fire drill. And I think we heard also the check-ins. So we're going to go on to, I've got one more question here, but, go ahead.
Sorry, my apologies. I have one other comment for those of us here in Bermuda. If there's anyone that's interested in learning more about mental health and how we can support our loved ones around us, there is a mental health first aid course that runs through, it runs every other month. Operator, I can certainly send that to Ms. Simmons afterwards. Mental health first aid, MHFBHD.BM. It's a really excellent course for those that want to understand how mental illness may impact those in our community from a layperson's perspective and what we can do to support those around us. It's similar to the way that I think of it is like first aid. As a layperson, being aware of how to respond in general terms to some physical health emergencies that may arise. The mental health first aid is the same thing from the mental illness perspective. And then I also just wanted to mention, because there was reference made to those who may be experiencing suicidal thoughts, there is a 24-hour mental health crisis line that's available. It's 239-1111. And so anyone is here in Bermuda is able to reach out at any time, 24 hours a day, and that'll connect you to a senior clinician at Mid-Atlantic Wellness. And so the way that I describe it when I'm talking with clients is the same maybe with that 911 for a medical or physical health emergency, then that mental health crisis line is available, and the number was designed to mirror the 911.
Is that 239-1111? Okay, great.
Correct.
Thank you. Of course, if you're here in Bermuda. So thank you for that. Those resources are so important for people to have that information. So I want to go ahead and ask, I think, what might be our last question. We'll see. This question is, can you distinguish between anxiety and obsessive compulsive disorder? Anybody want to take that one on? What's the difference between anxiety and an obsessive compulsive disorder?
So there are, I think it's like 8. I'd have to look in the DSM, but there are multiple different types of anxiety disorders. So obsessive compulsive disorder just falls under the umbrella of anxiety. But again, the thing with anxiety, it comes in different forms. So like for some people, they have a phobia of something. It could be a social phobia, fear of being around others, or fear of all sorts of different things. We all know phobias. It could be what we call generalized anxiety disorder. That's another disorder. PTSD, which we talked about. So obsessive compulsive disorder generally is people that have obsessive type of thoughts and also obsessive type of compulsion. So a lot of times in the movies, of course, the movies show all sorts of different stereotypes. It doesn't always happen in that way, but some of the things that you may have seen in movies is people that obsessively wash their hands, or they're afraid of germs. They think about it all day. They're locking doors, they're doing rituals, things like that. And that is one of the forms, but there's a wide variety of ways that obsessive compulsive disorder presents itself. But one of the major differences with anxiety and OCD is that, again, there's a spectrum. So you can be, again, if you have something that occurred in your life and you're thinking about it a lot, that may not mean you have OCD, but you're thinking about it a lot. You have typical anxiety related to that issue versus OCD, where it is taking a lot of time and energy out of your day for these rituals, for the compulsions, as we call them, for the obsessive thinking. But I would say definitely, again, as Mrs. Simmons said at the beginning, don't diagnose yourself, and definitely get to a mental health professional if that's a concern you're having. But the reality is anxiety, again, spectrum. There could be normal anxiety that many of us feel in a lot of different situations. And then the other end of that would be OCD, but it is considered one of the anxiety disorders. So hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with what Dr. Hammond said there. I would say that OCD is under the umbrella of anxiety. And so when you think of anxiety, you have to think of, it's actually a number of diagnoses that may fall under anxiety. And when you look at understanding how it may impact you, for one of the things I ask my clients is the level of impairment they experience to help them kind of guide what they need to do. Sometimes Dr. Hammond talked about phobias, for example. I may have a huge, fantastic fear phobias of gorillas. But if there are no gorillas in Bermuda, my impairment isn't actually that substantial, right? Because I'm never going to actually run into a gorilla in Bermuda. But if you live on New York City, Manhattan Island, and you have a fear of bridges, then your impairment may actually impact you quite substantially. You may not actually be able to leave the island very easily, and that may impair you to the point where perhaps you need to think about talking to somebody about getting through that phobia. And so it really kind of depends on how much it impairs you day to day and allowing you to live your life. And that was I think one of the earlier questions, the difference between shyness and anxiety. A lot of it, again, comes down to a level of impairment and this feeling of fear. When you talk to somebody who's shy and in terms of their personality, they may not necessarily feel worried about being shy. They're not afraid of being shy. They just tend to kind of prefer to keep to themselves. They tend to kind of keep to more not necessarily interested in engaging in others, but it doesn't necessarily give them harm. Whereas what Miss Simons was talking about earlier is that she wanted to do things. She wanted to engage, but she struggled to engage, and that gave her grief. And that's where we kind of say, okay, this is the difference between this is kind of telling us it's more anxiety than it is shyness. But I know that the question was on OCD, and I think that it kind of relates in the terms of level of impairment and how much it's actually impact you in the day-to-day life to kind of guide what makes the most sense for you in terms of intervention. When we talk about anxiety, I don't want us to sit here and assume that all anxiety is bad. Anxiety is an emotion that we have. It allows us to be human. It's very important for us to feel anxious about certain things. Anxiety, from an evolutionary standpoint, when you look through the cane grass and you see two giant eyes looking at you and you think that you might be on their menu, anxiety helps you run faster, ignore pain, get through the jungle, and climb up a tree faster than you've ever been able to do before. It's a sustaining emotion. It's the same kind of emotion that when you cross a road and you hear beep, it allows you to back off faster than you've ever been backed off. You may have been scrounging around, you may have been complaining about a bad back, you may have been, whatever, but all of a sudden in that moment, you're not feeling your back anymore. The pain just goes away. The instantaneous self-sustaining feeling allows you to get out of that situation so that you can survive. Anxiety is a very important part of our human condition. The problem that we have is that sometimes it lasts too long and it creates too much impairment for us. I look at anxiety and many emotions as a gas that should fuel our car. Sometimes we feel very passionate about things. We're very driven about doing certain things. But what ends up happening is the emotion becomes the steering wheel. And when the emotion becomes the steering wheel, it tells us which way to go instead of our logical mindset. And we're just completely charged by emotion and making impulsive, reactive, emotional decisions, as opposed to just allowing the emotion to drive be the gas in our car that drives us, as opposed to the steering wheel in our car that directs the direction that we're going. Sometimes we have to hold back and say, okay, yeah, I know I feel anxious about this, but that's because I don't want my house to become a complete pigsty. I don't want my house to be so bad that those giant cockroaches that Miss Simmons was worried about comes crawling through my door. That's not going to be cool for anybody. So I just want us to be reasonably clean. But what's reasonably clean? How do we understand the difference between reasonably clean and what's beyond reasonably clean, considering that we have 3 kids? And that's where we kind of have to say, okay, the anxiety is not a bad thing, but it's just turned up too high, too fast, and for too long, that it's creating us pain where we don't necessarily need it. And so I just want everybody to understand that today. It's so important that we don't look at anxiety and say all anxiety is bad. Much of it is just telling us that something important is happening. And we just need to be able to say, okay, we understand that it's happening, but let's not get carried away. Let's not get carried away and let it take our steering wheel to drive our car, where we really need to be more mindful about the bigger picture.
That is such a great explanation. I love how you spun that. Thank you. Dr. Sanon?
Yeah, I was gonna piggyback off the Dr. Ray, because that's exactly sometimes what I had to do. Sometimes my overthinking and my anxiety will cripple me from doing things that I really want to do. So for an example, I am terrified of flying. Terrified. It is absolutely something that I have to constantly talk myself through, but I love traveling. I have stamps in my passport. I have to renew it multiple times. Like, I love traveling. So I don't let that fear and anxiety cripple me from doing things that I enjoy. And that is those differences that Dr. Ray was referring to. So do it and do it afraid.
That's just it, you know. I'm the fact that I'm sitting here, you know, in front of a camera talking with, I can see some people on the screen, but I can't see everybody, you know, is a testimony in and of itself. When you say do it and do it afraid, you know, 5 years ago, if you put a camera in front of my face, I wouldn't be able to make a complete sentence. It just wouldn't happen. But it comes, you know, for me, I can only speak from my own experience, obviously. In this is not a cookie cutter template solution for everybody else. This is just what worked for me. But just doing it and putting myself out there. And each time I would, like, when I first would get in front of the camera, because I, like Dr. Nikisha Hammond, I also broadcast on Black Women in Power, which, like I said, has over 2 million followers. So when you get on, there's a lot of people watching you live. You don't have room to make a mistake, really. You know, but getting on, when I used to first get on, I used to panic, and I would be in the house like, I'm going live, be quiet, run around the house, like panicking, like, you know, trying to get the kids to be quiet. And then, you know, after, you know, a few months of doing that, you're like, okay, I can do this, you know, like it gets calmer. And now, and before I would have to have everything prepared, like every word, every if, and, but had to be written down. Now I find myself, I still do lives on a regular basis, but I'm like, oh, 5 minutes to go, I still got time, you know, I still got time to put my makeup. I'm like down to the last minute, to the time for me to press live, and I'm actually doing it. And it's just, you know, just a demonstration and an example that, you know, you can, if you're dealing with anxiety or any sort of mental illness, with the right help and support, you can get yourself to a point where you're doing things you never thought you'd be able to do, and where you're living your best life. And like I said before, that's one of the reasons why I wanted to have this discussion, so that people can do things that they don't think are possible. But again, with the right help and support and treatment, you can get there. It's possible. So helping people to see the possibilities. We are at our 10-minute mark, and just before I transition into our final thoughts and comments, I want to just check with my panelists. Is there anything else that anybody wanted to add to that last question, or any more comments on that? Go ahead, Dr. Chantel.
I just want to add a quick comment to Dr. Ray's feedback around, I'm smiling because one of the things I find can be quite helpful in the moment is debriefing. And he mentioned the term being a bit mindful in the moment. But, you know, if you go back to his example of, you know, seeing an animal in the cane grass, and that fight or fight response, what helps us to be able to run away and escape safety, that's our sympathetic system. So that's getting out of the way, getting ourselves to safety in the moment. But what debriefing and strategies like mindfulness can be very helpful is activating our opposite, so our parasympathetic system. That's our one that calms us down in the moment. The danger has passed. We've gotten out of the way of the car, and now we don't want to sustain that high activated state. Taking a few deep breaths in the moment can be very helpful in being able to recalibrate.
That's so good. Thank you for sharing that. This has been such a rich discussion. I am just really so thrilled with the content and the information that has come out and has been shared today. I really believe that it's going to be a blessing and a help to a lot of people. But what I want to do is pass the mic one more time to each of you individually to see if you had any final thoughts or comments, or any resources that you want to share before we close out. So I see Dr. Sanan on my screen, Dr. Sanan, sorry, on my screen first. So I'm going to pass the mic to you first, and then we can just go from there.
Thank you so much. Again, thank you so much for opening this conversation and just being so transparent, and all the panelists. It's a pleasure and honor to be amongst you, community of brilliant minds. So thank you. I would just like to add a quick thing. When looking for a therapist or looking for a counselor, it's okay to date your counselor just as you would date anyone else. Sometimes we get one person and we think, oh, this is the end all be all, I have to stick with this one person. And it's not the case. You are able to, pick the best fit for you. And in that, so I just wanted to emphasize that you should date your therapist as well. It was important for me personally to get someone who looks like me. So I did more research about looking up a Black therapist, a Black woman therapist in particular in my area. So it's okay to have those, things you want to in that person, definitely for sharing my story and be able to have someone who could relate to me in that way. So those are a couple of things that I wanted to add. Overall, I think it's important that we seek help, and then that we help one another. We talked about lifelines. You look at your support system, look at your inner circle, who is there to help you when you need it. And so rely on those individuals. Know you're not bothering them when you are calling them and asking them, if you had any questions or if you were struggling or anything. Those are individuals that love you and support you, so they will listen to you. So don't be afraid to reach out to your life supports. And overall, I thank you all. Thank you for being here. If you want to stay connected, I'm on social media, my first and last name on all platforms, and I would love to connect.
Thank you so much. I would really appreciate having you on. Dr. Hammond, would you like to go next?
Sure. Yeah. Again, thank you so much for having this today. Thank you for all the panelists. It's been a delight and an honor as well. And everyone that's attending, I really want to thank the audience as well, because it warms my heart when people really try to get this information about mental health. It's very life-changing when we do prevention, as Dr. Ray was saying earlier, when we get into more of that space, as well as intervention, but especially the prevention. I do want to remind everyone when it comes to anxiety, I think we said it a couple of times, but just as a reminder, remember that the thing about anxiety is a lot of it is the anticipation of something that could happen in reality, but a lot of times it's things that are very unlikely to happen anyhow. And that's where we get very caught up. Like if you think of a roller coaster, many of us as kids, you may have been terrified to go on a roller, heaven forbid, you're going to get hurt or something like that, to go on a roller coaster. And it takes a while, but then when you do, and you realize you're fine, you're okay, your brain starts to change. And that's more or less in a very complicated nutshell how anxiety works. So there is, like Mrs. Simmons was saying before, there's a lot of solutions. There's a lot of hope. There's a lot of research out there when it comes to anxiety. But I wanted to leave you all with my personal mantra that has gotten me through life. But just remember to keep going and keep growing.
Thank you. Wow. And just as a reminder, you guys will see that Dr. Hammond, there's been a lot of resources that have been put in the chat just within the last couple minutes, and websites and all of that. So please do check them out before you go. We will also make sure that we share this information again on our replay. Dr. Chantel Simmons, final thoughts?
So it's similar to the other panelists. I just want to also thank you so much for coordinating, for your authenticity, facilitating this discussion. It's been a real privilege and a pleasure to be here. I think the final comments from my end would just be to re-emphasize the range of options that are available, particularly for those within our community from Bermuda. The emergency numbers, as we said, I know that they're there in the chat and posted at 239-1111. Our goal is to ensure that there is help that's available in an emergency situation at all times. But also, I go back to just underscore the importance of those contacts before we get to that emergency situation. And then the final thing, I'd certainly echo Dr. Hammond's comments about many of the things that we worry about often don't end up coming into fruition. And so that anticipatory anxiety, I do think, can be quite debilitating. But my closing thought is just around being mindful in the moment as much as possible. One of my mentors shared with me, she made the comment that, when we're depressed, our thoughts are often in the past, like thinking about things that have taken place. When we're anxious, we're often worried about what may take place in the future. And when we're calm and peaceful, our thoughts are in the present. And for me, that's why I found mindfulness strategies like the deep breathing, meditation, etc., so helpful. So thank you all.
Thanks again, Dr. Simmons. And we're going to have a final comment by Dr. Ray. Go ahead.
Thank you very much again for allowing me to be part of this discussion. I think it was great to meet everybody and to have this rich discussion. Like I said, I think that the knowledge and the ability to kind of connect with people in a very important topic is invaluable, especially for a small community like Bermuda. But I'm so glad that you've been able to reach out beyond Bermuda and get connections there as well. So thank you very much, Dr. Sanin and Dr. Hammond, to be part of this conversation. I think it's been very, very blessed to have you here. I would say that I put my website for our office. We have a clinicians here. It's reachyourmilestones.com. reachyourmilestones.com. It's written in the chat group there if you wanted to go find it. And we're happy to connect with you if you feel like it's a good time for you to come in and talk to somebody. There are other resources available to you. And I think that it's great that we have, a number of options on the island. I guess if I were to leave you with some thoughts of mine, this has been talked about a little bit, but for me, one of the strongest and bravest things anybody can do is ask for help. I think it requires an individual to make themselves vulnerable with the hope of achieving a better wellness for themselves. I can't stress this enough. It's not easy to put yourself into this kind of position, but we're not here to judge. We're not here to take score. Our goal as clinicians, as helping providers, is to really to listen and to feel connected to you and to make you feel safe and in talking about things that may have been bothering you for some time, but you've been unable to kind of connect with them. Some people have protective factors around them, family, friends, exercise, things like that have been helpful, and they're very fortunate to have that. But sometimes it's not enough, and it's okay to say, I think I could use an extra bit of support here, and reaching out to somebody just to kind of see if there's anything else I can do. So again, thank you very much, Ms. Simmons, for your time. Happy 45th birthday. I really enjoy coming and being part of this discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, and I appreciate that very much. We are going to go ahead and close we are at the hour, and I want to respect the time of my amazing panelists, Dr. Chantel Simmons, Dr. Melissa Sanin, Dr. Nikisha Hammond, Dr. Darian Ray. We do have more information about them, their profiles, their bios, which is on you can go find it on their page, of course. The websites that they've shared. You can also find information on my website, again, which is www.justkyrios.org, JUSTKYRIOS. And this will also be available on YouTube. Same thing, Just Curious on YouTube. We will share it on other platforms as well, Facebook and whatnot. So thank you all again so much for being on. I truly appreciate. Thank you to our viewers, to those who asked questions, and for those who are now feel more poised to be advocates for other people and a life support to other people. So once again, thank you guys so much. Have a beautiful day, and we'll see you next time on a different discussion. God bless you all. Goodbye.